So I'm here with the lovely Shahid Buttar. He's running against Nancy Pelosi in California's 12th congressional district. So how are you doing, Shahid?
I'm doing great. I don't often get introduced as lovely, but I appreciate that. You're very kind.
Of course. It's a pleasure to have you on here. You know, I was actually following your campaign for a while. I did some videos about you a while back, and it's really good to see that you made it out. You came in second place, right? So tell us a bit about that, about this jungle primary and how that worked out.
Yeah, California has a somewhat unique structure for congressional primaries, such that instead of different parties running separate elections with the top vote getter from each party going to the November election, in California we have what is called a jungle primary, right, such that the top two vote getters, regardless of their party affiliations, go to the November election. And I'm very grateful to have won 33,000 votes. It makes me the first Democratic challenger that Nancy Pelosi will have ever faced in a November election in her 30-year career, which I have every intention of ending this November.
That's awesome. She better be scared. I mean,
yeah, she seems.
The thing is, she's been in her seat for about 33 years, right? And she's been part of many administrations, enabling them, the Bush administration and the Obama administration, and now Trump, and pretending to, mount this resistance. Can you tell us a bit more about what she did exactly? Because I don't think people are really aware of how complicit she was with the Bush administration, Obama, and Trump, especially in terms of foreign policy, right? So all those crimes. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I've spent the last 20 years fighting Bush's wars, Obama's deportations and drone strikes, and Trump's corruption, and Pelosi's complicity with all of it. And San Francisco deserves a voice in Washington that will stand with our city's values. Unfortunately, Nancy Pelosi has consistently put the Beltway and the military-industrial complex first. And for me, that was very visible early in my career, and certainly earlier in hers. I first came to the Bay Area in 2000 to study law, and I had a chance to teach at Stanford before I graduated, and I spent most of my third year there, and the many years after, organizing against Bush's wars. I was part of a movement of 20,000 San Franciscans who laid siege to the city nonviolently. We occupied the financial district for 2 days after Bush invaded, and ended commerce in the city, aiming to pull the corporate plug on a military-industrial invasion. And I saw at the time Speaker Pelosi, unfortunately, fund Bush's wars. I saw Speaker Pelosi, unfortunately, refuse to impeach a criminal president then, long before she refused to impeach and then ultimately showed up for a limited impeachment process of today's criminal president. I saw Speaker Pelosi participate in a continuing 15 years later cover-up over CIA international human rights abuses. Each of those acts, to me, are disqualifying. They indicated her willingness to put her career, political expediency, and Washington before San Francisco and the values and principles that our city is proud to share.
Yeah, of course, and I really admire that. I really admire the protests that you were doing all the way back then, during protesting the Iraq War. I also saw something about Lockheed Martin. I was like, wow, this guy's got, he's serious. And I also saw when, with Clapper, right, you confronted him about the mass surveillance program. And
yeah,
that's really something, and that's something I like about you, is that you're not coming from DC, you're coming into this as an activist, right? So you've also been a proponent of digital rights and trying to fight mass surveillance and protect people's privacy online. I really like that a lot. And can you elaborate a bit more about the EFF and your work with that as well? So
sure. Maybe if I can bridge the two, because my work in the privacy and democracy defending context includes at least some of the same tactics you were observing in my early political career. And I appreciate you rooting my history in my direct action background, because that's really where my political convictions, I think, have been most visibly demonstrated. And whether it was with the Lockheed Martin action, we mobilized 5,000 people around San Francisco, 50 of them got arrested, and we shut down a Lockheed Martin facility in a right-wing part of California for a day.
Wow.
When I was in Washington, we did all kinds of occupation actions. My proudest political acts actually have been forming politicized performance collectives in 3 different cities, in Palo Alto and San Francisco and Washington, D.C. There are communities of poets and spoken word artists for 17 years in each of those places, 18 years in Palo Alto, 17 years in D.C. and San Francisco, have been inspiring each other, training each other, hosting public performances, politicized public performances to basically do in real you see with corporate media, right? Offering the perspective that people don't get from our typical news sources. So what you and others in the independent media sphere do as well, in a meat space, creative leveraging sort of dimension. Just after Edward Snowden's revelations, some of the creative opportunities for resistance that I had a chance to pursue included a banner drop outside the NSA headquarters, a light brigade at the White House. I filmed a hip hop essay that explains the Snowden revelations in the context of Dr. King's experience many years before, and how all of what we sometimes describe as threats to privacy, threats to our
That's absolutely awesome. I mean, yeah, I think we just lost the connection there for a sec. No, I was just saying that's absolutely awesome. I think what a lot of people don't understand is that when it comes to digital rights and privacy, they think that, okay, if I have nothing to hide, then who cares? No, but it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way at all. And
well, absolutely. Another way you might think of that, the way Edward Snowden paraphrased it, is if you have if you have nothing to say, then you have nothing to fear. But if you have, and the question here is not about privacy.
Exactly.
It's ultimately about speech and democracy that's at risk.
Yeah, and something that I wanted to ask you about is what do you think of? I mean, pertaining to the presidential race, what do you think about Bernie Sanders, suspending his campaign, endorsing Joe Biden? Because what I thought previously, and a lot of people thought, is that why it's important for people like you to get into Congress is that if Bernie Sanders gets elected, he needs people who are also progressives in Congress to help him get legislation passed, right? He needs allies in DCs. And now that he's not running and Biden is the presumptive nominee, I mean, how does that affect the campaign and what you want to accomplish in the future? How do you feel about this?
That's a great question, and it's an uncomfortable question, I'll be honest with you, because I did run very much inspired to support Bernie's
right
in the wake of his withdrawal from the race. It does shift the context for what I'm auditioning for. And I'll be honest with you, there have been multiple nights, particularly the nights primaries and the day that Bernie announced his withdrawal. Those were tearful moments for me, because I saw the future calcify in ways that were unfortunate. I'm at the moment, I am sinking 20 hours a day, not into, unfortunately, having, which I hope to do in the longer term. But under the next president, whoever the next president is, whether it's the GOP nominee or the presumptive Democratic nominee, I'm going to be fighting the right wing in DC. And it might have a D after it might have an R after it, but either of the nominees have histories of racial predation, of misogyny, of cheerleading for wars. Mm-hmm. I can't be excited about that. And so whether I have to fight Trump or whether I have to fight Biden, I'm looking forward both to removing Pelosi and to emboldening a stronger resistance in Congress to defend our rights and our needs as working people in the face of a corporate takeover that has included both of the major political parties.
Yeah, and I mean that's. I was going to ask you. I mean, will you endorse Biden? Because all of the other Democrats, they're falling in line. And would you be endorsing Biden or not? That's the thing.
Whether I endorse Biden ultimately is up to him. I can't yet because his record doesn't warrant my endorsement. He's a figure who put millions of Americans, dark-skinned Americans particularly, behind bars. There's never been a war that he hasn't been a cheerleader for. And, wars are not only destructive human rights of industrial corruption, and they're climate catastrophes. What we fight wars for is particularly to extract fossil fuel resources that then become drivers of climate chaos. And so in each of these different contexts, we have seen Biden, unfortunately, support right-wing interests. And so I'm willing to set that aside if he turns a new leaf. I'm not sure how likely that is. I hadn't seen that in the debates. There might be some conciliation to the left implicit in his eventual choice for a vice presidential nominee. I hope that proves to be the case. I'm eager to see who, for instance, the bipartisan majority of American people that support universal health care. I'm eager to see him support ending the mass incarceration that he, as a senator, unfortunately did so much to create. Concerns about his candidacy and his campaign and his fitness at the moment. For instance, there have been unanswered allegations of acts of misconduct for which Biden hasn't even been asked. And I see Trump weaponizing his decline. I see Trump weaponizing Pelosi's opulence. All the very same things that we on the left have critiqued. This wing will weaponize in a way that will be very unfortunate. And I fear that the center is more inclined to lose to the right than to the left. That's what we can internalize from the consolidation in the Democratic field when Buttigieg and the rest of the careerists coalesced around Biden. That reflects the Democrats' preference to lose to Trump rather than Bernie. And that's a very dangerous position to take because at risk of rising fascism into which the corporate Democratic Party is ducking. And so, whether I endorse Biden turns ultimately on whether he shows up. Does he meet the needs of the moment, or does he, stick to status? But I'm eager to see him embrace positions favored by a majority of Americans. I think that will make both him a stronger candidate. It will make his campaign more likely to win, and it will give people like me
Yeah, I mean, that's really refreshing to hear because usually the response you get is that, oh, yeah, of course we're going to endorse Biden because Trump is so bad. And it's really refreshing to hear you or any Democrat call out the issues with Biden's record. I mean, the guy's responsible for so much stuff. Like you said, all the mass incarceration. He supported all the wars. I mean, the rap sheet is... It's so long. It's just ridiculous. So that's refreshing. And, I got to ask you, why would you choose to run as a Democrat, not as maybe an independent or third party, whatever? Because I'll get to my second question afterwards. But yeah, why would you choose to run as a Democrat, essentially? And if you see that they all behave this way.
Right. Well, that's precisely why I'm running as a Democrat. There are goals that I have in the race that are bigger than the capture of a single congressional seat. And they only work if we knock out the leader of a party and replace her. So it's not just knocking out Pelosi from the 12th congressional district. It's removing the corporate leadership of the Democratic Party. And that, frankly, is a bigger signal. One seat in Congress is one of 435. Right. I mean, so you're talking about like 0.25% of voting influence. So not very much. But because she is the leader of the corporate Democrats, if we remove her and replace her, the signal that sends, if we do it as a Democrat, is, frankly, it would be the biggest political upset in U.S. history. And we're on track to do it. That we have a platform that already reflects a majority of positions within the district. We have more support than any challenger Pelosi has ever faced in her 30-year career. I'm the first Democrat she will ever face in a November election. She's never faced another Democrat before. She's also never debated anyone in 30 years. And I think the case for her refusal to show up for work becomes particularly untenable, confronted by someone like me with as much support as we're getting. You know, we've been endorsed by the Tenants Union and Progressive Democrats of America and the Left Flank Vets and People for Bernie and the San Francisco Bernie-crats and Our Revolution groups all over, and
Mike
local
Gravel,
political figures
also.
and labor leaders. I'm very grateful for, Mike Gravel has endorsed us. Dr. Cornel West has endorsed us. Sean King, Linda Sarsour, Medea Benjamin, the founder of Code Pink. Some of the local folks include former members of our Board of Supervisors, Matt Gonzalez, Eric Marr, Vina Dubal, who's a labor law professor at Hastings. Just spoke to her yesterday on our live stream about gig workers and their rights in this time of pandemic. But this point about the local opportunity here, voters in San Francisco have a chance to send a signal nationally that will reverberate. And the reason why is because we're running from within the party. You know, if I ran as a Green, it wouldn't have the same valence. And it is ultimately the entire party that I hope to help recapture, not just a single seat in Congress.
But what do you say to people who then say that, okay, I mean, you got rid of Pelosi, and she is obviously, one of the most corrupt people in D.C. How do you get over $100 million in government? There's something wrong, man. I mean, looking just at her contributions, as they call them, their bribes. Yeah, I mean, what do you say to people, though, who argue that, okay, you got rid of her, but you still have the rest of the party that is not willing to go anywhere except right? And how do you get rid of the corporate influence over the other members in the party? I mean, you still have all the other corporate Democrats to deal with. So let's say that you got elected, and I really hope you do, because like you said, it would be one of the biggest upsets in modern American political history. But so let's say you get elected, and how do you make sure that the rest of the party, I mean, they stop taking corporate money and you get rid of that corporate influence over the Democrats and the House?
Right. So there's at least and I want to unpack different parts of your question. And the ultimate one, the crucial one, is how do we take a single seat victory and translate that into capturing the party? And I want to break that down into different pieces. The first is the signal it sends. So Pelosi is the strongest corporate Democrat in the House, without a close second. Like, she is the most well-funded. She is the queen of that cabal. And so if we knock her out, there is a signal it sends to every other corporate careerist in the Democratic Party. And the signal it sends is, you are not safe, because even your queen with all of the corporate money couldn't hold her seat. What that sends also is a signal to other potential candidates, people like me in other cities, saying, the ground is fertile. I'm responding to what Bernie established in 2016. Bernie proved that universal health care is an American preference. Bernie proved that climate justice is something that Americans will show up for, that racial justice is something that not just he and I care about, that these are widely shared convictions. And when we run and we win in the face of these challenges, and even if we, I think Bernie didn't win in 2016 and he still inspired me to get involved, there's a wave here that continues and builds over time. And I'm not just playing for November 2020, I'm very much playing for the future. There's another piece here that relates to the influence in Congress of progressives vis-a-vis the center. So in this current session, there was a fight over the leadership. Barbara Lee at one point had contested for a party, not the speaker's position, but the one that ultimately went to Hakeem Jeffries. And she represents a voice from the Progressive Caucus. She is a voice I would like to see be the Speaker of the House. And it wouldn't take many seats flipping from centrists to progressives for that to happen. If we expand the squad, we have a chance to put in place different congressional leaders who can do things like, instead of appointing Donna Shalala to congressional oversight panels to facilitate corporate corruption, appointing people like Katie Porter, who will do the job of overseeing the distribution of these funds and fighting corruption that unfortunately Nancy Pelosi has supported both through her own appointments and through her own decisions. The crucial piece to me here, aside from congressional oversight and its co-optation by the center, is the relationship between Congress and the executive branch. So for entirely too long, Congress has been a rubber stamp for every war, for every surveillance program, for every international human rights abuse. And I aim to publicly challenge that. That's what Ilhan Omar in particular has done such an amazing job of in just 2 years in Congress. She's helped challenge that bipartisan orthodoxy. And that to me is the crucial dimension in politics. That's what inspires me to run, is to challenge authoritarianism and to contain the military industrial complex on behalf of our democracy. I'm an immigrant to the United States. I care very deeply about the words that we have written on paper, the words that we've inscribed in stone, and I'm not willing to let them be sacrificed for the sake of the same political expediency that Nancy Pelosi has resigned those values for. And I do see that by taking the Democratic Party, by wresting single seats free and then fighting for the future, both in Congress and beyond it. That's the last thing I'll say.
No, please.
I know this is
That's what we're here for.
You asked me how we take the party. I appreciate that. Yeah, how we take the party, a crucial piece of it is outside Congress. I'm coming to Congress, as we started out discussing, as a direct action activist with an impact litigation background, and I ran nonprofits and I've done policy advocacy campaigns. There is an ecosystem that informs politics that stretches well outside the halls of Congress. Think tanks, nonprofits, activist groups, student organizers, and I've seen members of Congress, Keith Ellison comes to mind, Ocasio-Cortez comes to mind, who've played inside and outside the institution. I'm not going to be afraid to show up to do speaking engagements in the districts of centrist Democrats to recruit progressives to run against them. I will do that work. And that's the difference between a movement supporting candidate and voice in Congress and one that is there to advance a career in a set of corporate principles. I'm not just there to advance progressive legislation and real government oversight. I'm also there to organize within the body and to support organizing outside the body. And that's how we take the party through all of those different arenas. It can't be a single strategy.
Yeah, one critique that I would make is that, or a lot of people are making, is that, Bernie Sanders, he had this huge movement that he started building in 2016, and now he's just not doing anything with it. There's no direct action. You were talking about direct action, and I think that's a really important thing. What do you think about debt strikes, rent strikes, a general strike? Yes. What do you think about that? Yes. And why isn't Bernie calling for that? Shouldn't he be trying to do something given what's going on now, especially with coronavirus? People are really suffering.
People are really suffering, and there's a lot to do. And I'm happy to dig into some recommendations I would have around those more escalated tactics. I do want to wall off, for me, at least one piece of the conversation. I'm not going to, in any forum, criticize Bernie Sanders. He inspired me. He inspired millions of people. I think Bernie's done more to advance a humane vision of the future and a humane alternative to our predatory policies than any human being in literally a century. So, as far as I'm concerned, the man really can do no wrong here. And ultimately, he said throughout, it's not me, it's us. He disclaimed throughout his ownership of the movement, which says to me the movement is our own. It is what we, the people, make of it. And so I think very much that the ground is fertile. I think that we are poised and prepared, and I think we should take advantage of the moment. I've been calling for a general strike in this country for 17 years. I engaged in one when we were stopping the war in Iraq. The Occupy movement was an example of one. I think it's outrageous that people go to work in the face of corporate industrial resource plunder that is pushing their grandchildren off a climate cliff. That was before the pandemic, that illustrated in such inescapably concrete terms that we are only as strong as the weakest among us. There are so many failures of this institutional system. The predation is so obvious. It amazes me that Americans take it.
Yeah.
And I do think that we're long past the point of these kinds of strikes. And just to put wheels on the car, debt strikes and rent strikes relate to people basically forcing the banks to bear the cost by together refusing to pay. A general strike, people throw it around. I support it, but I want to be clear about what it is. A general strike is not just not going to work. What made the Montgomery bus boycott possible was people organizing rides so that people didn't have to take the bus to go to work or to school or get a meal, right? It's the alternative creation, it's the creation of alternatives to the market economy. That's what enables a general strike. So to get to a general strike, we have to organize everything from community childcare to transportation, to food service and delivery. If we figure that out, that's what enables a general strike. The resilience of a people turns on how much we need our institutions. And we can do general strikes. They can be more than just words when we've actually built the capacity to feed each other, take care of each other's kids, and get where we need to go. That is what enables a general strike. And so, as much as the rhetoric around it matters, I'm very eager to see people in our communities connecting with our neighbors to build these alternative means of support.
With this coronavirus, the stimulus packages are frankly insulting, and the problem is, like you said, there's no alternative means there. Those need to be built, and what do you think of the? Well, they've passed multiple bills now, but the the big one. When they gave trillions away and only $1,200 checks to the American people, what do you think of everybody voting for that unanimously? Bernie Sanders, AOC, the Squad, everybody. There was no. They gave some speeches on the floor, but at the end of at the end of the day, they all voted for it. Would you have voted for that? What did you think of it?
I was certainly disappointed that it didn't have more for working people. And the question in Congress at any given point in time is, can we get more? Given the realities in Congress and given the realities on the ground, just how much people are struggling, it's a hard time to say no to whatever we can get them. And I recognize that it's not enough by a long shot. My biggest concern with the bailout bills to this point is that they've been so lopsided on behalf of Wall Street. But I do also, in the interest of giving credit where it's due, want to acknowledge, in 2008 there was no direct support for people at all, none. And $500 billion going direct to the American people is more than you can shake a stick at. And I totally agree that $1,200 one-time payments are vastly inadequate. But that in particular is one reason why I want to raise and support and praise the expansion of the unemployment insurance system that Bernie Sanders engineered. There was embedded in one of those stimulus bills a transformative shift by giving gig workers and students access to unemployment insurance for the first time. And unemployment insurance is more than just the benefits that you get if you lose your job. Unemployment insurance is the capacity to organize. It's the opportunity to not need to work. And so when you expand unemployment insurance to those crucial sectors, that was a substantial, major victory for labor, not organized labor, but like people who work. And there hasn't been a victory like that in policy in the better part of 30 years. And that's worth acknowledging. So yes, corporations got too much money. It's particularly problematic how our criminal president has tried to cut the congressional oversight tethers. I'm very alarmed by that. And I think there should be more outrage and discussion of that. I also think there should be more discussion and praise and support and excitement about this expansion of the unemployment insurance system. It indicates the value, frankly, of Bernie's expertise and acumen and his continuing influence in the Senate and ability to get things done for us, even if he's not going to be in the White House.
Of course, huge credit to Bernie. I think he woke a lot of people up to what was going on, definitely. And he started a political movement. He woke up a generation. The thing is with this stimulus package, aren't you sending a signal to Wall Street and then they can just get away with anything? Because you got $45 billion going to the airline industry, and the private jet industry, et cetera, et cetera. Would you still have voted for that if you were in Congress, 2-3 weeks ago? Would you have voted for that stimulus package, knowing what happened?
If only to get $1,200 checks into the hands of people who need it, yeah, I would have. I'm not going to look the American people in the face and say that, we're not going to send you checks. And you could think of it as, and I think Ocasio-Cortez even used these terms, it was like being held hostage. And the fact of the matter is that Wall Street has the votes in Congress right now. That's just the fact of the matter. I think there are things we can do beyond speeches. I think we should be out there doing things like, going on tours to alarm the country about the contours of these measures that are problematic. I do the same thing, and I have been, frankly, long before I've had even sought a seat in Congress, around surveillance issues and mass incarceration issues. We need to take these issues to the American people. And Congress does important work within the body, there is also a lot of opportunity for members of Congress to be engaged thought leaders in our communities and to do it outside of their respective districts. And I'm very eager to show up in Republican districts and raise alarm among the voters there and help get Democrats in those seats, and not just any blue Democrats, but like Democrats like me in the squad. That's the project before us. And until we do that, just given how the votes are arrayed in Congress, we can't expect, frankly, to get bills. This is what I was talking about before when you asked me about my feelings in the wake of Bernie's suspension. I would love to be fighting in a Congress that will pass a Green New Deal. That's not going to happen in this session of Congress. We're going to have to replace a whole bunch of Democrats and Republicans to get there. That's what we're signing up for. We don't have a lot of time. We're under a decade. The clock is ticking.
Yeah, but
so we have to get on with it.
I mean, time is of the essence, of course, especially when it comes to climate change. But I mean, you coming from an activist background and you know your stuff when it comes to direct action, as opposed to a lot of those career politicians. I mean, wouldn't you argue that direct action can be more effective than slowly, bit by bit, trying to fill up the House with progressives? Because, I mean, like you said, the Occupy movement, for example, was quite effective until they shut it down. And you participated in protests. I mean, what would you say is important? Direct action or bit by bit getting progressive? Because I mean, a lot of people think that it's going to take too much time waiting for progressives to get elected, and maybe it's time to go for direct action, general strikes, rent strikes right now, especially when at the end of the day, AOC, the squad, Bernie, they're all voting the same way. I mean, there's a cohesion in Washington, D.C. You can't tell them apart if you look at the votes. So what would you suggest in terms of direct action to getting things done, getting a Green New Deal advanced, putting pressure on Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, we have to do all of it. We don't have the luxury of being able to choose just one. So at the same time that I hope to be fighting in Congress for whatever we can get, it doesn't remove the onus on all of us to do exactly what you're talking about. The other way to put this is you can't just vote. You have to vote and show up, and not just show up for campaigns, but show up in your community, right? I mean, the way I got to being a candidate was showing up for issues in my community. An off-duty FBI agent shot one of my unhoused neighbors about 200 feet from my front door a month ago. And, it's striking to me that, and this isn't exactly direct action, but it's community organizing. There have been 3 meetings in the wake of this shooting. Thankfully, the victim survived, so he's still with us. The first of the meetings was a local homeless youth services organization that was basically holding space for his friends and folks on the street to share grief. And, I don't know the guy well, but I've seen him around, right? I mean, he lives on my block. So I was there, met a whole bunch of people. The second meeting was convened by local leaders, including our district attorney, members of our board of supervisors, the police department. They all said this is outrageous, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it because this is a federal issue, and we as local officials don't have any influence or authority to even investigate this matter formally. We've tried, and here's all we can share with you, which was not much. The third meeting was our campaign and a cop watch group, and we pulled together the folks on the street, fed everybody. We heard from his family who was there. It was the first public meeting featuring the survivor's family. They FaceTimed him in from his hospital bed. So we heard from the survivor directly, and everybody in the room walked out with shifts to basically conduct counter surveillance operations of the local police department, recognizing that they weren't the ones who shot him. But as long as we're responding to federal violence, we should at least take advantage of the opportunity to organize responses to the state violence that we can reach. And, and I'm certainly committed, if I replace Nancy Pelosi, to raise the questions that she has refused to ask, like why is the FBI shooting unhoused people in the Haight-Ashbury? These are community organizing techniques. And so I want to distinguish direct action, which can be flashy and ephemeral and important, from sustained community organizing around issues. Like just to, pull examples, like community gardens are incredibly important community organizing projects, not just because it's, teaching people permaculture, but it's about bringing communities together. Anything to get people together. We were talking before about the poetry and spoken word and hip hop groups that I've established in the past. What ran through those groups was every kind of campaign, right? Those groups became spokespeople for climate justice campaigns, for peace and justice campaigns, for racial justice campaigns, for economic justice campaigns. They participated in events and rallies and concerts. They promoted those causes in, guerrilla style at times when they weren't as visible otherwise. There's a million ways to promote social change. Mutual aid is one that seems particularly impactful and important in the face of a pandemic. I've had a chance to, deliver groceries to an elderly couple and take wildfire. We got a bunch of particulate masks for the wildfire season last year, and turns out they were helpful. It turns out they're less helpful than we thought they were, but they were needed at the time for COVID response. So we donated those to a local nonprofit that supports unhoused people in the Tenderloin. And for the first month after the pandemic hit, all that our staff and volunteers were doing was calling San Franciscans not to promote our campaign, but just to check in and make sure that people had access to, where they could get a free meal and knew how to access benefits. That's not politics. It's not incremental change. It's not even politics at all. It's something else. It's community. And so, beyond politics, there are other things. And I think the way we get to democracy in the macro scale is by building community in our respective spaces. And so I would absolutely agree that it's not enough to vote. We have to vote and engage in our communities, support issues, connect with our neighbors, share ideas, and form common plans. That last piece is the key. This was my work at EFF, was building grassroots networks around the country to promote digital rights offline. And the key there is to meet people face to face when you can. I know it's hard now, right? But, we're doing as well as one can. But to connect individually and to reach common plans, to get to a point where you're talking about something, anything. It doesn't even frankly matter what the thing is. You can host bake sales, stand on a corner with a sign, write letters to your member of Congress, run for Congress, deliver groceries. There's a million ways, but do something. That is the key.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with the whole notion of community building. Mobilizing, doing things together, and just just to reference that, if you look at how the New Deal was passed, if you look at how socialists actually got that. If you look at the history in America, they did get it by mass mobilization, right? So, that is having a coalition and going on strike. So looking at that, wouldn't the logical conclusion be that you actually have to build a coalition politically and a mass movement that is ready to go on strike and not feed the capitalist machine? Because yes, you gotta, like you said, you gotta do both. But right now, what I'm seeing is that, and this is before COVID-19, obviously. Like, there's just no movement. There's no coalition. Occupy Wall Street was the last kind of thing, and that's over a decade now. So, if you were elected, if you were already sitting in Congress, would you be calling on people to go on rent strike right now, or a general strike, or any kind of mass mobilization?
I ultimately am running to represent, not to lead. So I don't think that's my place, right? I think that's what the Reverend Haley Barbers are for. That's what grassroots leaders are for. I will support measures to, for instance, impose rent and mortgage freezes and moratoriums, right? I'm running to make policy and to educate people, ultimately. If members of Congress are trying to dictate the tactical terms of our grassroots movements, we've already failed, frankly, right? That's part of what got us here. Is taking cues from members of Congress about what kinds of grassroots action will be helpful. And members of Congress shouldn't be the arbiters of that. That should be something that communities are setting. I'll support those calls, absolutely. And the way that I support those calls as a member of Congress is to support legislation to impose a freeze and forgiveness of rent and mortgage payments. That's the policy that represents the movement. I don't think from the inside it's my place or any of my colleagues' places to try to dictate the terms of what happens outside. But if the question is, will you show up in solidarity? Hell yeah, that's why I'm running for Congress, is to show solidarity. I've been on the outside, and I'm aiming to go on the inside. And I'll take the same concerns with me. I'll take the same tactics with me. It's just that the relationship to the outside from the inside has to be one of accepting leadership and supporting it, not trying to set the methodological agenda. Does that? Yeah.
The thing is that Bernie Sanders, for example, or AOC, the thing is they're not willing to vote no against the stimulus package, or even when electing Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House, and AOC voted to elect her. And it's just weird, because you would assume that, okay, these people are they're progressives, they're diametrically opposed to the neoliberal agenda, but then at the end of the day they just keep voting like neoliberals. And AOC and Bernie Sanders, they have extraordinary reach. So my point is, they have influence, they have leverage, and why aren't they using it against the corporate Democrats?
They use it. I mean, I think the whole discussion about the unemployment insurance program, I suggest that maybe you're not seeing how they're using it. But they're using it to pretty amazing effect. I mean, gig workers and students have the opportunity to organize for the first time in our nation's history, because they're included in the unemployment insurance program. So this is the clause
program. That Bernie put in, right?
That with a right-wing Senate. Right. That's a big deal, especially given the composition of Congress. And the idea that we would just not sign the bill is, it seems irresponsible to me. I'll put it that way, because people are struggling. And I get that this is a distributive inequity, and I'm as concerned about it as anybody else. But I would describe this as the right wing holding the people's representatives hostage, saying, if you were going to meet even the barest minimum of the needs of your constituents, we're going to take a pound of flesh. And that's what they did. But I want to contrast that with 2008, when it was worse, right? I'm trying to acknowledge progress in a way that your question is perhaps not acknowledging. And at the end of the day, our job in Congress is to legislate. And, I have in other contexts suggested and, holding out to get more. And I think that's how the progressives got the expansion of the unemployment insurance benefit program. I think they did that by saying we're not going to vote for a straight corporate giveaway. And we have to increase our seats to build our leverage. We have to also leverage our influence inside. And as I've been saying, we have to support movements outside. So the idea that Bernie or AOC are letting the movement down by voting for bills that we're unfortunately disappointed by, I can't support that position. I think that's a very myopic, linear view of a complex ecosystem in which they have a role and the rest of us have a role. And we shouldn't be looking to elected leaders to tell us when to be outraged. I mean, I think they've told us to be outraged, but we should be looking to each other and our community leaders to actually engage and mount campaigns. I don't think we can look to Bernie Sanders or AOC or me for a call for a general strike. That's got to come at the local level. And again, a call for a general strike is meaningless. People have to build the capacity to withhold labor. So talking of a general strike, it's like talking about a unicorn. We have to build a general strike, and members of Congress can't do that. There's nothing we can do for that. That has to come
let's say you get elected. How are you got rid of Nancy Pelosi? How are you going to convince and push other Democrats who are taking bribes from the corporate, the private sector? How are you going to convince them to support your agenda?
We just replace.
If you're outnumbered.
We don't. We don't convince them. We build the movement to replace them.
But isn't that going to take too much time?
I can't say we're going to do this in 6 months. This is going to be an endeavor. And I wish that there were faster alternatives. Democracy is slow. And, all I can do is take down Goliath. I mean, you're asking me a conversation about, how do we transform an entire superstructure. And, I wish I could tell you. At the end of the day, I have an elephant that I'm trying to chew, and I'm not trying to chew the whole zoo just yet. But I do think that when we replace the queen of the corporate Democrats, it will be very obvious to many centrists that they don't have a choice. I think the ones who don't show up for work, we are going to have to work to remove. And there is not a faster solution than that. I wish I could give that to you. I hear you and a lot of people clamoring for very urgent change. It's not going to happen. The best we can do is replace the impediments to progressive change with people who will champion it, and then let the chips fall where they may. I do think that with more voices in the squad making those kinds of arguments, we can extract more concessions from corporate capital in the future. Will there be a revolution led by members of Congress? Probably not. But I will certainly be supporting those goals in policy from within the institution.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you just also about the BDS movement. We're jumping into foreign policy sort of right now, but you had a few people in the progressive wing of the party voting to condemn it. I think you support it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
in two different dimensions too. There's both BDS as a substantive commitment to challenge the institutional crimes of recipients of U.S. military aid. And I want to be expansive here. It's not just Israel. I want to cancel aid to Saudi Arabia, too. We shouldn't be giving aid to countries that abuse human rights, period. There's also a second dimension of this, and this is whether or not we support the right to engage in boycotts, divestment, and sanctions. And that's a First Amendment issue having nothing to do with foreign policy at all. And I'm alarmed on both counts by the deference of corporate Democrats, first to international human rights abuses, but then also to domestic civil liberties violations. We have to protect the right of Americans to participate in political speech and action. That includes boycotts, divestment, and sanctions. We should also continue to support the international human rights principles that we fought a world war to establish. And that includes withholding our aid from countries that violate them. Those shouldn't be controversial positions. I see both of those as quintessentially American positions. I'm disappointed by the corporate wings of both of the major parties that have thrown their lot in with international human rights abusers. That's something we have to end.
So, I mean, the thing is with foreign policy, I mean, it's really good to hear that you'd expand that to Saudi Arabia as well. The thing with foreign policy is that, you know, you have this imperialist agenda that's governing everything. And I mean, you've done a lot of activist work against the surveillance state, the military-industrial complex. How do you seek to further that while in Congress? So how can you take that to the next level?
So the very first thing in the context of the big picture issue is to defund the Pentagon, to shift resources from the Department of Defense and all of the three-letter agencies surrounding it, DHS component agencies, and consolidate some of these agencies.
Yep.
You know, at the moment, we have dozens of duplicative, wasteful agencies pursuing effectively fraudulent missions. The Pentagon, the one time it's ever been audited, was found to have lost track of $21 trillion, which is just frankly absurd and entirely unacceptable. And it's just like pouring money into an abyss. And this shouldn't surprise us. The architect of the military contracting system, President Eisenhower, warned us this would happen on national television 60 years ago. So, you know, I would heed his warning. I would close those spigots of corruption. We have to subject military contracting to a much more independent process. You know, at the moment, for instance, this is a good example, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program. This is a strike fighter platform that can't fight a pandemic, can't fight a virus, can't fight terrorism, can't fight climate change. All it can fight is a land army. Where does a land army rank on our national security threats? Pretty low, right? I mean, a pandemic is worse, climate chaos is worse. Both those are our principal, and losing the post office to ensure that an election happens. Those are our principal national security imperatives at the moment. You can't hold an election with a fighter plane. You can't heal people from coronavirus or stop coronavirus with a fighter plane. And you can't stop climate chaos or save people from hurricanes or floods with a fighter plane. Why are we wasting $2 trillion on a fighter plane that can't even fly, that is obsolete already? The Chinese already have alternatives to radar detection that render the invisibility technology of the F-35 obsolete. So we're talking about investing trillions of dollars in an agency that's already lost 10 times that for an obsolete weapons program that, even if it did work, can't meet the strategic needs of our future, while people are starving in the street. It's not just a mess. I mean, this is just, and it's corporate Democrats who vote for those military budgets. That's how we start fixing it, is shrinking that budget, dialing up the budgets, for instance, for affordable housing, dialing up the budgets for healthcare, establishing a human right to food, and resourcing that with grants to the states to make sure that no American goes hungry. Those are the ways that we start to move those commitments forward.
And I mean, the Pentagon's been audited, and there's like $21 trillion missing. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And all of these progressive programs, I mean, just Medicare for All alone, I mean, the money exists. It's just being appropriated, you know, to continue these wars. And, you know, I speaking of foreign policy still, you know, I want to ask you, like, what's your stance on Syria? Because you have, you know, the thing is, what I find really weird is that you can listen to a Republican, a neoliberal, and a progressive, and somehow they all have the same opinion on foreign policy, and it's the same kind of mentality that, oh, we know better and we have to get rid of XYZ, whether we're talking about Maduro, Assad, whatever,
Right.
and whether it's sanctions or, boots on the ground. And what is your opinion on all this? I mean, I know you led some protests against the Iraq war, but specifically now with what's going on in Syria, with what's going on, Trump sending the Navy to Venezuela.
Right. I'm a non-interventionist. So I'd like to close U.S. military bases in foreign countries and bring our extended deployments home. In each of these places, we only face these questions because we presume the right to be there in the first place. But, to your point, we shouldn't have a footprint halfway around the world. I think Americans underestimate and disregard how much we have a global empire, even if we don't call it that. And I don't think a global empire serves our nation. It certainly doesn't serve the countries that we are present in, and it doesn't serve the climate. As we've discussed, these military deployments burn carbon and they pull fossil fuels out of the ground, right? So that's not helpful to the future, and it's not helpful to human rights. So I'm very eager to end deployments. When we think about Syria, you could think about everything that's happening in the Middle East today as the result of genies that were let out of bottles, and genies that were let out of bottles, particularly because of the interventions of foreign countries. I go back to the British 150 years ago, our country in the last 50 years, particularly in the last 20. We cannot help. Nothing we have done there has helped anybody. And the pretense that we can help by doing anything is preposterous. We are absolutely part of the problem. And so getting out of the way is the best thing we can do. I think that, propping up multilateral institutions to the extent there's a role for the UN, we are billions of dollars in arrears to the United Nations. Anything that we do internationally should be done under the aegis of a multilateral international institution that is accountable to the people of the globe, not just our corrupt leaders in Washington. That's a way we could advance peace and stability in other countries, making sure that we're, some of I think our military's proudest moments have been the times when they have repurposed for humanitarian relief, for instance, in the wake of earthquakes. We've seen great work by the Defense Department airlifting supplies to, mountainous regions in Afghanistan, for instance, after earthquakes. That's the kind of work that will build the goodwill that will actually enhance U.S. national security. We enhance U.S. national security with doctors and food more than we do with missiles and bombs and aircraft carriers and drones and fancy weapons. That's the way that we advance U.S. national security. That's the way that we support climate justice. It's the way that we advance human rights. We can support all of those things by reorienting our international presence to be multilateral and humanitarian instead of weapons-based. Think about the relationship between supposedly humanitarian goals and so many of our recent military interventions, right? I mean, among the things that we justified the invasion of Afghanistan for was supposedly liberating women. Right. And we have to decouple the idea that our military can do anything to advance humanitarian aims or anything to advance democracy, because we can't. The only thing our military can do to advance democracy abroad is to stop giving money to dictators.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you can also put the armed forces to a lot of good use, and when it comes to disaster relief, things like that. And I'm all ears, and this is really good. It's really good to see somebody, a progressive alternative to Nancy Pelosi, especially because she's leading the corporate Democrats. She's leading the pack, and I'm actually curious because right now with the quarantining going on, and physical distancing, how are you making sure that you're getting your message out to voters and canvassing, because you can't go and knock on doors. Yeah. I'm assuming it's not as practical as before. So how are you handling that right now in this crisis?
It's been a real challenge. I won't lie to you. All of our staff, and I, we're all at our homes. I get out for a daily walk, and that's nice. But we can't knock on doors. We can't do events. We can't do mobilizations with volunteers. All that's off the table. We can't do happy hours. There were a bunch of ways we were building community among the volunteers. Like the event I was talking about with our unhoused community after the shooting with the off-duty FBI agent. None of those kinds of things we can do anymore. So our principal pivot in the last month has been to setting up tools to enable distributed phone banking. This is the kind of operation that a lot of us were supporting with Bernie's presidential campaign, where we were calling voters in other states to let them know about their options on the ballot. Before, we had a phone banking operation, but it didn't have the scalability that our new one does. So we've built new tools, thrown the doors wide open. Anybody, anywhere can call San Francisco voters on our behalf. I'd invite any of your listeners to plug in at shahid.fyi/volunteer, or you can go to our website, shahidforchange.us, and click volunteer in the corner. We'd love to have you. When we were calling states for Bernie's campaign, a lot of times we only had a few weeks, and we were trying to cover a lot of geographic ground, entire states, states as big as Texas, for instance. And that's a hard challenge just because it's so much territory with so many people and so little time. We have over 6 months left in our race, and my district is just a single city. So it's absolutely doable. We have hundreds of people on the phone already. We will get to thousands with that kind of voter outreach support, even if it's not in person, even if it's not on the ground, even if during the pandemic we can do is reaching people over the phone. We're going to do that. And frankly, it could be a silver lining in the dark cloud of the pandemic for our campaign is the opportunity to engage now thousands of supporters in identifying voters and letting San Franciscans know how our voice in Washington has been standing, unfortunately, against our city's interests, and how we have an alternative. One thing I wanted to share there in terms of our city's interests, we haven't yet talked about housing, which is a big issue here in San Francisco. In fact, you might describe it before the pandemic hit as the issue in San Francisco in a bunch of different dimensions. A lot of people don't have it, and our unhoused community is very visible. There are thousands of San Franciscans who don't have shelter in one of the wealthiest cities on the planet. And it's a perfect microcosm for corporate capitalism. This divergence between the people who not just have, but have everything, and the people who not only don't have, but have nothing at all, even shelter when it rains. And, the pandemic makes clear that we have mutual interests in making sure that everybody not only can get to a doctor, but making sure that people don't get sick, which ensures having a roof over their head. And we should be showing up for these mutual interests. And in the housing arena, Nancy Pelosi has been in Congress for 30 years. During that time, the federal spending on affordable housing has collapsed. And it shouldn't surprise us that during her tenure, that's been the result. She is a wealthy landlord herself. And I don't think we should expect wealthy landlords to go to bat for renter rights, but we need someone to go to bat for renter rights and to go to bat for affordable housing. And I'm very eager to expand the squad here. Ilhan Omar, Bernie Sanders have an insightful proposal, the Green New Deal for public housing, to retrofit existing housing stock. I want to create a whole new class of social housing owned by the government and accountable to residents and communities. We can do that. And that's what should have happened in the last 30 years. And the fact that we have an urban housing crisis around the country is an glaring, inescapable reflection of the failure of the corporate careerists.
It's absolutely horrible. And you also, on top of it, you have the homelessness crisis, which it's like the housing exists. It's not a question of a lack of housing. It's just that
right.
And
that's right.
It's really horrible. And Nancy Pelosi also, she's making bank, renting out properties and stuff on top of all the bribes she's taking. So I really hope you get rid of her. I really do. I just wonder, like, once you get into Washington, you, just like the other progressives, you don't take any corporate money. It's all grassroots donations. How do you also make sure that
that's right.
You don't, how can I say this? Well, not corporate influence, but just how do you make sure that the Democratic Party doesn't crush you? Because they can still exert influence and pressure. How do you make sure that you don't bend to that pressure?
Well, maybe the most convincing thing I can share with you there is just that I don't care about my career. The way that corporate Democrats assert pressure is by threatening people's careers. There's carrots and there's sticks, right? Oh, you can gain this committee assignment if you do this. Oh, you're going to lose this opportunity if you do X, Y, Z. I'm not here for my career. If I was interested in my career, I would have stayed at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. That was a great job. It was really stimulating. It was secure. Running for office against the most powerful corporate politician on the planet is anything but secure, right? So, like, if I was interested in my career, I'd be back at EFF. I loved it there. I loved my colleagues. I loved the work. It was really compelling. But I couldn't just watch my elected voice in Washington run our city and the rest of our country into a brick wall. And that's what I've seen happen over and over again for the last 20 years. And I frankly couldn't do it anymore. So that's why I'm here. In terms of, ensuring that the Democrats don't crush me, this is also why the outside game is important. When I talked about taking these issues to the American people, going on tours to bring these issues into districts that are not mine, represented by our antagonists in Congress, this is about circumventing traditional channels. And that's the only way to get there. We have to think about this as a multi-strategy exercise. And I hear your point from before about wanting it to happen faster. This is not going to be fast. Liberation is not going to be fast.
Not faster, but just that, people are starting to feel disenfranchised and they're hurt and disappointed and they feel like there's no hope and I'm sure you've heard of Dem exit.
We've faced much darker days.
Yeah. So I mean, what would you say to people who want to leave the Democratic Party and who aren't going to be voting for Joe Biden or down the ballot, and which in your case that's really important that people vote down the ballot in November. So what would you say to them?
Well, I would make that distinction. Whatever you need to do with the presidential race is your choice. And I live in a blue state, so whatever I vote for president, frankly, is immaterial because I know my state is going to be voting Democrat. And for people in battleground states, I make no recommendation. Do what you feel the need to do. Again, when I think about a Biden presidency, I see it as one that I'm going to have to fight. I'm fighting the Trump administration, Biden administration, whoever's in Washington whoever's in the White House in the next congressional session is going to be an antagonist to the vision that I'm going there to promote. And so I'm committed to holding the line on our principles. And I would say to people who are disillusioned by the current moment, remember that you have choices still. You might not have a choice in the presidential slice, but you can still support congressional candidates who will defend the needs of the future. I'm not alone. There's others too. I think about Michaela Wilkes in Maryland, Joshua Collins in Washington, Marie Newman in Illinois. There's a whole bunch of us who are challenging the corporate center, and you can support the future by getting us some more seats to expand the squad. That's still an available opportunity. I would also remind people, and this is the key part, we have it great now, relatively speaking. I mean, pandemics obviously are hard to grip that moment in, but think of it in these terms, okay? 100 years ago, a whole bunch of people couldn't even vote if they wanted to, right? When we were talking about the history of strikes and mobilization before, that's how women got the right to vote too. We have a long arc that continues to bend in favor of justice. We were talking before about the unemployment insurance program and the fact that students and gig workers can get access now to government support for the first time ever in U.S. history. That's a big, big deal. We have to acknowledge momentum. We have to acknowledge success. And part of that means recognizing it has been so much worse for the people that preceded us. If we think it's bad now, if we feel disenfranchised now, try saying that to somebody in the South with dark skin in 1950, right? We have it great now. We have to acknowledge our privileges and recognize them. And I totally recognize that people are hurting right now. I am too, right? Losing Bernie, seeing Bernie go down. I'll tell you how it felt for me. It was, I'm a fan of like martial arts movies, and it's like seeing the protagonist in the like duel go down, and I'm one of those people like standing on the sidelines, like jumping in, into a fight that's frankly like I just saw someone much stronger than me, much more resourced with vastly more experience go down, and I'm like the next in line, and it is, I'll be honest with you, it's terrifying, but I'm here for it. I mean, we don't have the opportunity to choose our battles in this world. And unfortunately, the present is what we confront, and I'm here to defend the future in the face of it. And I know that I'm not alone. That is made inescapably clear to me every day. We have tens of thousands of supporters, tens of thousands of voters supporting us. We're going to have to get that to hundreds of thousands. We have thousands of people on the phone. We're going to get there. And to each of us in our individual corners who feel like the future is hopeless, you have to remember that you're not alone. That's one reason that Not Me, Us is so important. Neither will any of us be the solution, but neither do any of us need to be the solution. We are here together. We are ultimately in this together. And it's hard during a pandemic in time of isolation to feel together. I know that that's a challenge that a lot of people are going through.
But, whether it's through these remote collaboration opportunities, whether it's through hearing voices that align with yours, I would just implore your listeners to remind themselves of that. None of us are alone at a time like this, even if it might feel that way. And in knowing that you are together with, and I want to be clear here, legions upon legions of Americans who support climate justice, who support racial justice, who support fairness in our economy, who want to make sure that we, the 99%, can survive a viable future. You're not alone. We are all in this together. We will be successful in the long term. We just have to do the work and continue showing up in whatever forums are available to us, organizing in our communities, not stopping the work. The only thing we have ultimately to fear, I'll paraphrase FDR here, is fear that will paralyze us. The only thing that will kill the future that we can breathe new life into is our fear of embracing it. We have to take advantage of whatever our opportunities are in the present. And
I hear what you're saying that, we have it better in some ways, but I mean, at the same time, in the last 40 years, there's been no wage increase. And I mean, especially in the last, since Bush, the mass surveillance program has spiraled out of control. So, I mean, people losing their privacy, their right to privacy and their Fourth Amendment rights. And I mean, there's the union movements have been crushed. So I mean, in some aspects, it's gone downhill, and the corporations have co-opted the Democratic Party, right? They've put a stranglehold on it, and it's no longer a party that represents workers. And so I mean, my concern is that I feel like you're going into this fight with good intentions, and it's such a corrupt place that it's going to blunt any kind of resistance because they're so effective at it, right? So that's the thing why I'm a bit worried, and why other people are also a bit skeptical also about trying to reform the Democratic Party, because even Bernie Sanders couldn't do it, and like you said, it's like all of us watching this hero of ours being not once but twice struck down, and it is disheartening, and it's kind of like, okay, well, we tried reforming the Democratic Party. What now? That I think that's where a lot of the sentiment comes from.
Right. Well, and I think you're correctly pointing the lens at some of the answers, and that is don't just vote and don't limit yourself to electoralism. To your point before, like the way that we won transformative policy goals in the past was by organizing. Right. And particularly like labor organizing and community organizing unlock a lot of opportunities. And so, and there's another point I'd maybe make here, and this is a little bit of divergence, but I often say to people that there are antidotes to despair, to political despair. One of them is action, and the other one is community. The more you talk about it and the more you're online, the less satisfying it will be. But the more you do it and the more you engage, it will be very satisfying. It is a generative exercise to build community. And so that disheartening, I think, that you're describing, it owes to some extent to people displacing onto Bernie what we have to do ourselves. There is no hero.
I agree.
No hero will save us. I can't save us. All I could do is remove the principal impediment to a progressive vision in Congress and support the squad and get another vote for our vision to support the future going forward. But I can't save us. Barack Obama couldn't save us. Bernie Sanders couldn't save us. No one is going to save us. We are the leaders we have been waiting for. And there's no alternative.
Yeah,
there's no substitute
on this point, I think you're right on the money, because I've been saying, for a while that you can't let a movement, whatever it is, hinge on one person or a handful of people, because, if they get taken out by whatever, then the whole thing collapses. So it has to be a grassroots movement, and people need to build it. You can't rely on people in Washington or a handful of people, like I said, to do it. And I definitely agree with that. I definitely agree. It's not going to be one person saving everybody. It doesn't work that way. So I mean,
and that's why we liked Bernie. Bernie acknowledged that. His chant was not me, us. He knew. I mean, I have so much respect and admiration for that man. It almost brings tears to my eyes thinking about it. Like his prescience in recognizing that late in his life, he would not be the one to necessarily see the movement over the transom, but how much he did to prepare us and connect us and inspire us and mobilize us. I am very deeply committed to him, his vision, his sacrifices for all of us. When he says not me, us, part of what he's saying is it's up to y'all.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying when we chant that. That's what we are saying. It's up to us. We have to do this work. We can't pretend that Bernie or AOC or I or anybody's going to do it for us. This is something that we have to all lean into, and despair is totally understandable. And we are down, but we're not out by a long shot. And if you need to understand how we're not out, part of the way to get there is to acknowledge how we've moved forward historically. Part of that is to acknowledge that you're not alone, and there are others that are struggling alongside you in a million different ways. And part of that is just to roll up your sleeves and dive in, and then you'll see the progress, because it'll be right in front of your face.
I mean, I really hope that they don't try to blunt your enthusiasm or your drive, your fire when you get to DC.
Well, they will.
Yeah, because I mean, you're not going after just anyone. It's Pelosi, so they'll hate you for it.
Oh, they will. They're trying to blunt it now. I mean, just the fact. I mean, she is the leading corporate fundraiser in the House, right? She's outspent me 10-1. So I would be. I look forward to the opportunity to confront the challenge that you're describing. There is a whole other one in my way at the moment, so I'll be privileged to deal with the dynamic you're worried about. But I'm going to try to get this seat first, and we'll see where we go.
How can people help your campaign? Where can they go? Where can they donate? Where can they follow?
Thank you. Check us out online. Our website is shahidforchange.us. People can particularly sign up to volunteer and join the phone banking operation. The short link for that is shahid.fyi/volunteer, or you can do it off the homepage on the website. Again, shahidforchange.us. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch at Shahid.
All right, man, that's awesome. And just one last question before you go. What's in your fridge?
At the moment, I have a bunch of leftovers. I made some potatoes, carrots, and eggplant the other night. Bujia is sort of like a dish with cumin. So I've got some of that. I got some rice. I probably have some chocolate milk. I think I have some frozen peas.
No designer waffles. Ice cream.
No $200. Yeah, I do like ice cream, but I can't afford the stuff that Nancy Pelosi eats. That's way out of my price range. And
hopefully, when you dethrone her, you get to keep her fridges. So
I don't think it works like that, but I will look forward at least to sitting in her seat.
For sure. So, man, I really appreciate all your time. I really appreciate you coming on the show. There's still a few months to go, but hopefully we see you again on the show, and best of luck. And you're going after a real beast here, so you really got to keep fighting. And thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it. All right.
Thank you, Richard. It's great to be with you. Keep up the good work, brother.
All right. Bye.
You too.